Tate Chronicles now transmitting.
Welcome to the Tate Chronicles on Healthcare Now Radio. And now, here's your host, Jim Tate.
Good day, citizens of the free world, from border to border, coast to coast, and to all the ships at sea. I bring you a warm welcome. This is your correspondent, Jim Tate, and thank you for tuning in to the Tate Chronicles. Join me as we cut through the fog that exists at the leading edge of healthcare technology. My guest today is none other than Mr. Willam O'Toole, founder of the O'Toole Law Group, specializing exclusively in health information technology. I've known Bill for a number of years, consider him a good friend, and he represents healthcare provider entities and technology companies really in all aspects of acquisition, development, and distribution, with special emphasis on EHR contract creation negotiation. And for almost 30 years, his work has exclusively focused on health IT. Bill, welcome to the Tate Chronicles.
Welcome, Jim. Thank you for having me.
I know as a trusted advisor to many of the companies in the HIT field, large ones, small ones, medium-sized ones, you often wear different hats. And beyond just the legal issue, your knowledge extends directly into the promises and challenges of healthcare technology. And I've always enjoyed our conversations related to interoperability. But first, let's go back to the beginning. What led you to focus on healthcare information technology in your legal practice? Where did it all begin, Bill?
Well, that's a long answer. About 10 years ago, I was counsel at Meditech, and I had been Meditech's counsel for almost 20 years. And then I left and founded my own law firm. My start really began way back in the early 1970s. My father, a physician, he's passed away, but he was Meditech's first lab customer in 1969. Around about 1972, I was learning what computers are. I was 12 years old, and I remember being in the lab in the middle of the night with, 6, 8 Meditech techs who had come down to help out with some problem, and I was just hooked. So from there, after college, and I went straight to Meditech and really, really enjoyed everything about it. I should back up and say I, was determined to be a doctor like my father, but in the midst of pre-med in college, he more or less waved me off. He said, if you think it's going to be just like it is today, it won't be. Everything will be different, and it's not going to be the same. He didn't speak negatively, but so I went to economics route and then ended up at Meditech, law school, corporate counsel, and I used to take phone orders from East Operating Systems for Judy Faulkner way back when in the commercial division at Meditech. So, in short, I just, if not a doctor, I wanted to be around healthcare. And these computer things back in the 70s amazed me, and I got hooked on it and stayed in it my whole career.
You and I are just about the same age. I may have a couple of years on you, Bill, but just to be able to experience really the birth of computerization to where it is now and the direction is headed, promise of artificial intelligence and those other kind of things. It's kind of reminds me a little bit of my grandmother who back in the day, first time she was a teenager when they put electricity in her house. And what a difference that make. She used to go around the house screwing the light bulbs tighter because she was scared the electricity was going to leak out. So hopefully we're not quite at that place. And what happens in healthcare now could not be done in terms of the types of access we have to data and reimbursement, and those kind of things. But let's talk a minute about some of the work that you have done for HIT vendors. I'm sure there's some common mistakes that have been made for vendors in their terms of service that might bring liability. What are some of those common mistakes you've seen?
Well, obviously, there's such a range in size of companies. I mean, there's the massive and there's the startups, but in general, as I'm talking to the, smaller, to emerging type companies, a lot of the mistakes I see, if you break it down into two general categories, one would be vendor to vendor. That might be a surprise to some people. And the other is obviously the vendor to the customer. In terms of the vendor to customer and the terms of mistakes that they could, bump into, I would probably key on, the subscription terms and the start of the terms. When does everything start? And that becomes surprisingly a big issue, particularly when you're dealing with subscription terms. Is it when you sign the agreement, pay them all the money up front, or is it on live? So you want to keep a good track of your rollout, and then compare that to the hospital expectations. And you have to listen. You might have an opportunity where it's a 10-site rollout. They want it all at once. As a big bang makes sense or not? You got to work through those things. So I would say, as to the relationship with the provider, you really have to be most aware of, the general terms and the pathway they want to take to install. And then secondly, you really have to be very careful of business associate agreements and HIPAA. Are you a direct business associate? Are you a subcontractor? Are you being interfaced to your company? Are you a subcontractor BAA? So those are the big main ones, as to hospital. As to the vendor to vendor, you can kind of group it into, maybe 3 categories. Again, I'm going to hit the business associate agreement, because here's where you end up with the, possibly 2 vendors working together and serving, one hospital with a combined solution. Well, who's first in line as the business associate that's getting the data first, and who's second? And I see that get reversed all the time. And I see that as a big problem. Another might be the SLAs, service level agreements, and pass-throughs. If you're dealing with a vendor and, maybe they're just distributing your product, which dovetails to my next issue, would be, distribution agreements and SLAs between 2 vendors. So if you're the guy that's being resold your product through somebody else, you need to make sure that your SLA terms are covered, at least in their terms. Maybe you don't offer 24/7 support, but they do. And if you're a sub, are you expected to now staff up for 24/7? So that's just a quick highlight. As for the distribution aspect, whose paper, who's selling it? Are they truly, is the little guy allowing the big guy to resell, and the little guy's product will be on the big guy's paper? Or is the big guy referring, doing the selling and marketing work, and then when it's time to sell, they say, okay, here's our contract for our piece, and here's this contract for the other guy. Those are some of the things you really, really have to be aware of. You might not know what you even want going in if you're the little guy. But that would be some of the, the real highlights. And, I wouldn't say mistake, but maybe oversight. You don't know what you don't know, but you do have to be careful of everything, or you could lose your company. I have seen some bad ones. I guess here's a big mistake that some small companies or even big companies might make. You are vendor of choice. It's a huge deal, massive healthcare system, let's say. And you send them your contract and they send it right back and say, we won't use yours. Here's ours. Now, some companies will fight that to the end and try to, use their template, which I think is correct, given that it's the company's IP and their technology. However, some of these big health systems, they're very advanced and very technologically savvy, and they have tons of lawyers, and they believe they know what they're doing. I've seen a client get an agreement in that type situation where if they had signed it without checking with me, they would have signed over their entire company and all their IP rights to the hospital. So that obviously would have ended the company right there. So carelessness, if they had just said, oh, they must know what they're doing, they're ABC Health Center, that is not always the case. And it's not intentional or sinister, I don't believe, but that's a real world example. So,
well, one thing you got to touch on there, Bill, is the let's just take providers, but it could apply to vendors also. If you have a large hospital system, or kind of a mega practice with many providers, they're going to be they're such a scale that they can have dedicated HIPAA experts and security officers, things like that. A small practice, 1, 2, 3, or 4 providers, is not going to be able to have that level of expertise.
Right.
And so the same thing, it seems true of vendors. The really large EHR vendors a good example is we're moving up to this deadline for around interoperability of the FHIR API, so folks can get access to their information. A really large organization could dedicate a number of people to that. A small EHR vendor is not going to bring near the expertise to understand the nuances and the workflow around that. So there's kind of an imbalance there, that I don't know if that's ever going to be really worked out, so.
That's true. That the imbalance exists both ways. It's so for the smaller operation, they really have to be aware and do their research and, bring in the lawyers, unfortunately. I'm lucky or fortunate in my long career that I've learned so much at Meditech from a technical aspect. I mean, when you deal with a quarter of the nation's hospitals and 40% are Canadian, and then you figure all the consultants and employees and lawyers that all those people, bring to a table, I've had massive amounts of input. So it's, it's nice to see the progression. And I'm just pleased that I've been able to, understand, not at the super technical level, but on a good foundational knowledge of the technical aspects. And that really helps me sit at a table and hear, one side saying, oh, we can't get that over there, via this API because it has to go through so-and-so. So I can parse out the questions that need to be asked and hopefully arrive at the solution where both sides at the table just say, absolutely, that's it, write it down.
Exactly, yeah. To our audience, if you're just joining this episode, I'm Jim Tate, and on this episode of the Tate Chronicles, I'm speaking with Bill O'Toole. Now, Bill, you've been in healthcare domain for over 30 years, and 20, 30 years ago, those early days of health information technology, before even certification, it's kind of like the Wild West. There's confusion around requirements and lack of clarification. And, there were many, I'll give you an example, laboratory instruments that maybe could generate results in an electronic format, but they wouldn't be in an HL7 format. They could be imported EHR. And so it seems to me that at least there's been a big move forward in the standardization of requirements and code sets and things like that. Has that been your experience?
Yes. I mean, overall, through, roughly both of our careers, the past 30 years, I mean, as I think of the progression of things from, let's say, early 80s, FDA certification for blood bank software. Mm-hmm. And then you had the FCC on handheld devices, Y2K, Sarbanes. Let's think, HIPAA was 03, ONC was 2004 by executive order, then mandated by Cures Act, and now, and then the High Tech Act, excuse me. So what I saw there, through all of that is, in a good way, the government saying, I guess the government and society in general saying data, this is all new. Look at all this stuff we can do.
Yes.
Computers. So, the government, stepping in and helping out with the High Tech Act and reimbursements. And then, as we, approach, I'll say the next decade, it's got to be interoperability, TEFCA and Sequoia. And yes, I think it's a good thing that the government is helping, but, at the same time, and I know this sounds very negative, but it is the government and things can get tougher and harder to do and take longer. So my hope is that, as an industry incentive or push that, we can start doing all this ourselves. The TEFCA and Sequoia working on the QHIN, common agreements, but if we can start at the bottom up and deal with little guys and create an API license that everybody likes, like an open source license, why not get the ball moving? The finance industry, they have data standards. We should have our own data standards. We should be able to do all this. And I look forward to it. So, yeah, I mean, the old days of the Wild West in health IT with, little to no data protection.
Right.
It wasn't so much a thought, really. Nobody was being sinister saying, oh, look, we can do all this with this data, like the metas of today. But it was, a realization that I would say probably started, I'm going to say either New York or California, but I remember California and dealing with hospitals. This was at Meditech, and they were very concerned about the information about their patients.
Yes.
And hey, Meditech, you have to keep this data secure, and I just remember that theme then. Now, we were dealing with a hospital that had celebrities, movie stars in it. So obviously they didn't want, Joe Jones appendectomy getting out in the public or what have you. But that's really where I started, seeing the beginning of data protections, I would say.
Well, when those first commercially available computers were being brought in, at first, at least what I saw in the health information technology space, it really wasn't for the clinical data. That first wave was for practice management systems, patient demographics, billing information, who they're, that kind of stuff. And then maybe 5 years after that, we started getting into the clinical data. And we can't fail to mention that there was actually something born called the internet.
Yeah.
And once that happened, it really opened everything up in terms of the sharing of data and clinical decision support often, and electronic prescribing, all those things. It's really been an evolution. There's no doubt about that.
I just thought of one as you said that.
Yeah. What was that?
Case mix management was mandated in the 80s, I think, and that's when people had to write case mix management to go along with admissions. So that was a good data move.
Yes, it was. You mentioned, kind of made a reference to TEFCA and interoperability. So let's talk about that a little bit, because I know you're very interested in focused as an interest area of yours on interoperability, because you've seen it from square one. We had some of the first attempts for the regional health information organizations, and then the health information exchanges. And now there's, I guess the FHIR APIs that have been mandated are really for patient access to their data. But that kind of universal or a complete set of data that is, I guess, promised by TEFCA of true interoperability. Do you think TEFCA is a viable option, or are there any real challenges to it beyond just adoption? I'm asking you to read the tea leaves.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge, adoption, but adoption can be forced, and I don't necessarily mean by legal mandate, but
right,
it can be forced just by the crowd. If everybody's saying, let's do this, who's holding out? Who isn't agreeing to it? I think that plus, being able, the biggest hurdle they probably have, in my opinion, is coming up with the framework that can be, sold, adopted, by the industry. And it's probably going to be the vendors first. I would think, my guess is the hospitals, they understand patient data is the patient's. I think initially it was perhaps some hospitals said it's our data. And I always, no, it's always the patient's data is my focus. So, I think their biggest challenge will be, doing their job, meaning coming up with a good framework and some pieces of paper, just like we have, a sample business associate agreement under ONC, that somewhere, any little company or any little hospital can turn to and say, okay, that's the minimum standard. I know what to do. I'd sure like to have a few pieces of paper that do an API license. Any two vendors in a hospital, anybody could pick up and say, geez, that's fair. I understand. I do this, you do that. Here we go. That would be my goal. I mean, TEFCA is top down, and it's important because you need to build from the top down for the top entities, I believe.
For the meaningful use program, hospitals, no doubt, are going to adopt health information technology. For providers, I think we'd had a plateau. I'll make up some numbers, maybe 25 to 30% of providers, not counting hospitals, were using EHRs. And then we had the whole meaningful use incentive program, and I think that drove it to 70 or 80%. And then there's been this push with the macro MIPS program that based on how you use that certified technology, it affected your reimbursement upwards or in a negative fashion. And so I believe there are some potential financial reimbursement benefits that have been outlined in TEFCA, especially for hospitals around the macro MIPS promoting interoperability aspects of things. I don't know the exact details, but it is going to take something like that to really spur adoption. That's just my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, there's a lot to it, and I think the more entities realize that the end point is good, then let's I know this sounds a little bit naive and pie in the sky, but we can do this. We can all get it done. So I'm all for it. I think the sooner we get there, the better. It just makes so much sense.
We kind of know the architecture of TEFCA. The actual use case is going to be interesting to see as they develop. But I can imagine a patient going to a provider's office, the provider in their EHR, the patient's registered, they know who that patient is, and in their EHR, there's a tab or button they could push that polls the TEFCA network, which is really a network of networks,
right?
And pulls all that stuff in from anybody who's connected to any of the qualified health information networks. Now, what that data will look like? Will it just be a mumbo jumbo thing? Will it be duplicates in there? Will there be real value in that at the point of care? The quick and easy answer is, well, of course, but the devil's going to be in the details. I certainly hope it. I certainly hope it lives up to its promise.
I do too.
I hope so.
I mean, we've got a search engine within a search engine. We're going to use the TEFCA network to find the data that we want using the entire big network. It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
Yeah. We don't have too much time, just another couple of minutes here, but I know you probably go to a lot of conferences. Are you going to be going to the upcoming, well, we're recording this in December of 2022. March has both the Vive conference as well as the HIM conference. Are you planning on attending those?
Yes, I do. HIMS is a regular for me. Except in COVID, I skipped it, but
right, sure.
I definitely, and I also like health, HLTH. I saw that in Boston. I was very impressed.
I was wondering about that. I'm sorry I missed it.
Yeah, I really liked it. It was a lot of technology being displayed with less sales emphasis is how I would describe it. I really enjoyed that one. But the conferences are great. And, most of my time is spent trying to discover and learn and see what's new and, walking the fringes of the halls, and meeting all the little guys, the big guys. I can find them anytime on the internet, but it's the little guys I'm so interested in the new stuff. And it really is amazing to walk around. I mean, I've been in this for 30 years. I've seen disk drives go from 100 megabytes,
yes,
a washer machine to thumb drives. So
I know.
It's an amazing thing. So I do enjoy it.
Yeah. And I'm just going to fascinated, the two things I'm really fascinated, well, there are a number of things, TEFCA, the promise of TEFCA. I'm really interested in artificial intelligence in healthcare and precision medicine. Once we can kind of get some genomic standards and databases up and running, that's going to be exciting going forward.
Agreed.
Well, but before we say goodbye to everybody, Bill, how can our listeners contact you to find out more about your services or maybe figure out some way to catch up with you at Vive or HIMSS next year, how can they reach you?
My best suggestion is my website, o'toollawgroup.com. I'm happy to talk to anybody. If somebody has questions, feel free to ask me. I don't start the billing. If there's networks, if you're trying to look for a connection, I know people everywhere. So small companies, if you got some general type questions, feel free to ask, and I'll tell you when I think it would hit the billing clock, but otherwise I'm more than willing to help.
Well, thanks for that, Bill. I think you probably have a philosophy like mine. Before it's all said and done, you want to have a conversation with everybody in the field at least once. Yeah. To our listeners, thanks for joining us on this episode of Tate Chronicles. And, of course, I offer a special salute to my friend and guest today, Bill O'Toole. Bill, thanks for coming aboard today.
Thank you very much, Jim. Thank you, everyone.
You can find more information on this show's program page at healthcarenowradio.com. Until we meet again, here's wishing you smooth sailing and safe harbors.
Tate Chronicles transmission ending now.